soreness. It was the only thing Rhea truly owned. Sharp ice bit into her knees because the bone graveyard never stayed warm. She knelt among the rib cages of dead wolves and waited for the ghosts to speak. Soon after, a cold wind whipped her silver hair across her face. Alpha Kalen stood behind her, his shadow long and mean. He didn't see a woman. Rather, he saw a tool to be used. He wanted the location of the elk herds that had vanished. Because of that, he pressed a heavy paw into her shoulder. "Speak, freak," he growled. Rhea closed her eyes. In that moment, the world of the living faded away. What followed was a rush of gray mist. The spirits of the dead began to crawl over her skin like spiders. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stop the shiver that raced down her spine. The dead talked to her in the dark. Still. The living only wanted to hear her scream. Truth be told, she sometimes wished she could just stay in the mist forever. "North," she whispered. Her voice sounded like breaking glass. Next, her head snapped back. Her eyes turned a milky, sightless white. What's worse, she felt the spirit of an old scout try to take her tongue. He was hungry. He was cold. As the silence stretched, she saw the elk hiding in a deep canyon where the sun never touched the snow. Moments later, she tore herself away from the vision and fell into the mud. "Good," Kalen barked. After that, he kicked a pile of dirt onto her legs. "Maybe you are worth the meat we give you." Even so, Rhea felt hollow. She was a bridge made of bone. She was a cage for the lost. She was a girl who had forgotten her own name. Deep down, she knew the truth. She was dying a little bit every time she touched the dead. In the quiet that followed, a heavy silence settled as the pack left her alone. Yet, Rhea didn't move. She stayed in the dirt because her body felt too heavy to carry. While her pulse raced, she felt a new spirit watching her. This one wasn't old. It didn't smell like earth. Instead, it smelled like cedar and rain. Suddenly, the mist around the graveyard began to part. Before she could move, a massive black wolf stepped into the clearing. His eyes were molten gold. The moment their eyes locked, Rhea forgot how to breathe. What followed was a sound that shook the very trees. It wasn't a growl. Rather, it was a roar of power. So, Rhea watched as the black wolf stopped 10 paces away. In the echo of his voice, the ghosts went silent. Because of that, she felt a strange heat bloom in her chest. Maybe it was fate, but for the first time in her life, the dark felt safe. Still, she knew this wolf was dangerous. He was the king of shadows. Under the weight of his stare, Rhea felt her own wolf stir, and she let it happen. They didn't treat her like a person. Rather, they treated her like a radio for the dead. Rhea sat in the corner of her cold cave and hugged her knees. Next, she tried to wipe the graveyard mud from her skin. Her hands were shaking. Because of that, she couldn't get the dirt out from under her fingernails. To make things worse, the spirits were already whispering again. They wanted things she couldn't give. They wanted to live. Despite that, Rhea could only offer them her breath. In fact, she had once tried to run away when she was 10. Soon after, the ghosts had screamed so loud her ears bled. They had dragged her back with cold, invisible hands. That's why she never tried to leave again. What followed was a rough hand grabbing her hair. Kalen had come back. More importantly, he looked angry. "The elk weren't there," he hissed. Before either could speak, he threw her against the stone wall. Her chest ached as the air left her lungs. "You lied to me, hybrid." I didn't," she choked out. Her voice trembled because the fear was a sharp knife in her throat. "The spirits! They show what they want." "Then make them show me what I want!" Kaelin roared. Without another word, he shifted. His body cracked and grew. What's worse, he was a massive gray wolf with yellow teeth. As her wolf stirred, Rhea curled into a ball. She didn't want to fight, no matter how hard she tried. She couldn't find the strength. Deep down, she knew the truth. Kaelin would kill her if she didn't find the secrets of the ancients soon, which meant her time was running out. But then, the cave entrance exploded with light. Before she could move, the black wolf from the graveyard appeared. He wasn't in wolf form anymore. Instead, he was a man. He was huge. His shoulders were like mountains. In that moment, the air in the cave changed. It became thick and hot. As the silence stretched, Rhea stared at the newcomer. His name was Malakai. Truth be told, he looked like he was carved out of shadows. Even so, there was something broken in his eyes. In the quiet that followed, a low, rumbling sound came from his chest. "Get away from her," Malakai commanded. His voice hung in the air like a heavy weight. As a result, Kaelin backed away. So, Rhea watched the two alphas face each other. While the forest held its breath, Malakai stepped closer to her. As the bond pulsed, she felt a jolt of fire go down her spine. She didn't know what scared her more, the monster attacking her, or the king who looked like he wanted to own her. She felt it, etched in fire. He was her mate. Yet, she was a graveyard. How could a king love a grave? Without thinking, Rhea reached out a hand, and she let it happen. The earth began to scream before the wolf even appeared. Rhea felt the ground shake under her feet. Next, she saw the pack warriors falling back in fear. At the same time, Malakai walked toward her with a slow, predatory grace. With every step he took, it made her heart skip a beat. Because of that, she forgot her pain for a moment. More importantly, she saw the ghost of an old man standing behind him. The ghost had a crown of silver fur. Deep down, she knew the truth. It was Malakai's father. The old king was snarling into Malakai's ear. To make things worse, Malakai looked like he was in agony. "You see him, don't you?" Malakai whispered. When her name left his lips, Rhea felt her world tilt. As if pulled by a string, she stood up. "I see him," she answered. Soon after, she reached out to touch the air. As if summoned, the ghost of the old king became clear to everyone. The tension broke as the warriors gasped. In that moment, Rhea realized her purpose. She wasn't just a tool for Kaelin. Rather, she was the only one who could save Malakai from his own blood. More importantly, Malakai wasn't looking at her like she was a weapon. Instead, he was looking at her like she was a miracle. "Help me," he rasped. Between one breath and the next, he fell to his knees, which meant the ghost of his father grew larger. It was trying to drown him in guilt. To make things worse, the ghost was screaming about a hunt that went wrong. Her heart skipped because she felt Malakai's sadness. It was a cold, deep ocean. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stay away. Her body moved on instinct. She walked to him and placed her small hands on his head. As the bond pulsed, Rhea channeled her power. In a single heartbeat, the world shifted. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, she pushed the ghost back. In the stillness that followed, a blinding light took over. While her pulse raced, the spirit of the old king grew quiet. Still, the work wasn't done. Even so, Malakai let out a long, shaky breath. As the silence roared, He leaned his forehead against her stomach. The space between them burned. Truth be told, Rhea had never been touched like this. It felt right. It felt like home. But then, Kaelin let out a howl of rage. Before either could speak, he lunged. As her instincts surged, Rhea knew she had to protect Malakai. So, she called upon the dead. As if fate demanded it, 3 spectral wolves rose from the ground. They met Kaelin in the air. The air thickened with the smell of magic and wet fur. As the echo faded, Rhea realized she had just declared war. As the truth unraveled, she knew there was no going back. She felt it, etched in fire. She was his, and she let it happen. His eyes weren't gold. Rather, they were a sun that wanted to burn her secrets away. Malakai stood up and wiped the blood from his mouth. Eventually, he looked at Rhea with a hunger that made her knees weak. More importantly, he stepped into her personal space. Between them, something cracked. It was the wall Rhea had built around her heart. Because of that, she felt naked under his gaze. Still, she didn't look away. In fact, she wanted him to see everything. She wanted him to see the hollow parts. She wanted him to see the ghosts. Moreover, she wanted him to fill the silence. "You are coming with me," he said. Without another word, he grabbed her hand. As the silence stretched, his touch felt like lightning. So, Rhea followed him out of the cave. What followed was the entire Great Northern Pack waiting outside. They were hundreds of wolves. As the sky darkened, they all bowed their heads. As the bond pulsed, she felt their fear turn into awe. They weren't bowing to him. Rather, they were bowing to her. As result, her thoughts spun. She was a hybrid. She was a freak. Yet here they were, treating her like a queen. "Why?" she whispered. Her chest ached as she looked at him. Under the weight of his stare, Malakai stopped. "Because you are the bridge," he replied. As if the world narrowed, he leaned down until his lips were inches from hers. "You are the only thing that makes the voices stop. Not only that, you are my mate." In the span of a breath, Rhea felt the bond snap shut. In a single heartbeat, the world shifted. As the bond pulsed, she saw their future. She saw a pack of spirits and living wolves. She saw herself standing by his side. By the time he touched her face, a surge of hope made her want to cry. Maybe it was fate, but the little girl who sat in the bone graveyard was gone. Instead, there was a queen. As the silence roared, Malakai kissed her. It wasn't gentle. Rather, it was a claim. It was a promise. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, Rhea kissed him back. But then, a black shadow moved at the edge of the woods. Before either could speak, the ground turned black. To make things worse, the Bane Wolf began to laugh in her head, which meant the fight was just starting. Yet, as Rhea looked at Malakai, she wasn't afraid. As her instincts surged, she knew they were ready. With his scent in the air, she felt her soul answer. She felt it, etched in fire, and she let it happen. What followed was a journey through a forest that felt alive because the spirits were screaming. Rhea felt the Bane Wolf's laughter clawing at the inside of her skull. It was a greasy, cold sound. After that, her vision began to blur. Every tree looked like a twisted limb, and every shadow looked like a mouth. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't block out the oily voice telling her that she was a disease. Deep down, she knew the truth. The Bane Wolf didn't just want her power. Rather, it wanted to use her to eat the world. Suddenly, her legs gave out. Before she could move, Malakai was there. His body moved on instinct. He caught her before she hit the sharp rocks. In that moment, the air around them turned freezing. What's worse, black veins began to crawl up Rhea's neck. Her voice trembled as she looked at him. "Leave me," she begged. He's inside." "Never," Malakai growled. Without another word, he shifted. In the span of a breath, the massive black wolf stood where the man had been. Next, he nudged his head under her arm, which meant Rhea realized he wanted her to climb on. As her wolf stirred, she gripped his thick fur. In a single heartbeat, the world shifted. As if pulled by a string, she felt his strength flow into her. Because he was her fated mate, his heartbeat was the only thing that kept the darkness from swallowing her whole. With every step he took, the earth beneath his paws seemed to groan. Yet, he didn't slow down. By the time they reached the hidden mountain pass, Rhea was burning up. To make things worse, the spirits of the northern ancestors began to howl. They weren't welcoming her. Instead, they were warning the pack. That's why Rhea felt a surge of shame. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, she realized she was bringing a monster into Malakai's home. Still, he didn't drop her. More importantly, he carried her toward the glowing torches of the Great Lodge. As the air thickened, Rhea felt the pressure of 100 eyes. She didn't know what scared her more, the demon in her head or the pack that was about to judge her. And she let it happen. Come morning, Rhea woke up to the smell of cedar and the sound of angry voices. She was lying on a bed of soft furs inside a room carved from ancient wood. From there, she could hear the elders arguing in the hall. What followed was a sharp realization. They knew what she was. Because she was a hybrid, her scent was a beacon for every fear they had ever known. Truth be told, she couldn't blame them. As her thoughts spun, she looked at her hands. The black veins were gone, but the skin felt thin. Meanwhile, the door creaked open. In the stillness that followed, Malakai walked in. He looked tired. In fact, there was a fresh scratch across his chest. "The elders want you gone," he said. Between one breath and the next, he sat on the edge of the bed. Under the weight of his stare, Rhea felt her heart skip. "They say a queen of the dead cannot lead a pack of the living." "They are right," Rhea whispered. Her chest ached because she wanted to stay so badly. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't find a reason to argue. Instead, she looked at the window. As the sky darkened, she felt the Bane Wolf stir again. "I am a danger to you, Malakai. What's worse, I can feel him getting stronger." "He is only strong if you are alone," Malakai countered. Without thinking, he took her hand. As the bond pulsed, a jolt of electricity raced through her. The space between them burned. More importantly, his touch silenced the whispers instantly. As a result, he leaned in until their foreheads touched. As the silence stretched, he wasn't just a king. He was a shield. He was a hearth. He was her son. Wait, have you ever felt a shadow touch your heart? Because the Bane Wolf was a parasite, it fed on her dread. But Malakai's love acted like a wall of fire. But then, a low, rumbling growl echoed from the hallway. Before either could speak, a young warrior burst in. Actually, it was a face Rhea didn't recognize, but his eyes were wrong. They were black pits. Between them, something cracked. In that moment, Rhea realized the Bane Wolf was already inside the walls, which meant the war wasn't coming. It was here. As the echo faded, the possessed warrior lunged. Without another word, Malakai threw himself in front of her, and she let it happen. In a single heartbeat, the world shifted as Malakai and the possessed warrior crashed through the wooden door. Rhea scrambled off the furs, her legs shaking. Next, she saw the hallway filled with shadows. What followed was a nightmare. The Bane Wolf wasn't just one spirit, it was an infection. Because of that, some of the northern wolves were turning on their own kin. So, Rhea realized she couldn't run anymore. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, she called out to the dead. As if summoned, the spirits of the ancient alphas rose from the floorboards. Yet, they were confused. They didn't know who to fight. "Malakai!" Rhea screamed. Her heart skipped as she saw the possessed warrior sink his fangs into Malakai's shoulder. To make things worse, black smoke began to pour from the wound. As the silence roared, Rhea felt the bond between her and Malakai begin to fray. She didn't know what scared her more, losing him or becoming the monster they feared. Deep down, she knew the truth. If she didn't commit now, they were both dead. That's why she stepped into the center of the chaos. Without warning, Rhea let out a howl. It wasn't the sound of a victim. Rather, it was the roar of a sovereign. The tension broke as every shadow in the room froze. As the truth unraveled, Rhea felt her soul answer the call. She felt it, etched in fire. In that moment, she didn't just feel him. She breathed him. She knew him. She became him. Because their love was fated, the stars themselves seemed to watch as she claimed her throne. Without thinking, she grabbed the possessed warrior by his throat. As her instincts surged, she didn't use claws. Instead, she used her spirit. As her wolf stirred, she pulled the black rot out of the warrior and crushed it in her palm. A beat later, Malakai stood up, his wound smoking. In the quiet that followed, the pack elders stood in the doorway, their mouths open in shock. They didn't see a freak anymore. Rather, they saw a savior. As the bond pulsed, Malakai walked to her. With his scent in the air, he knelt. The moment their eyes locked, he bared his neck to her. So, Rhea realized he was asking for the blood bond. It was the final threshold. In the echo of his voice, the entire pack knelt with him. As if fate demanded it, Rhea bit down on his shoulder, and he bit hers. Time stood still. In a single heartbeat, the world shifted. And she let it happen. As the bond pulsed, Rhea realized that the Bane Wolf was screaming in agony because she was no longer a hollow vessel. Instead, she was full of Malakai's light. Yet, as the ceremony ended, the wind carried a new sound. To make things worse, the ground outside began to crack open, which meant the Bane Wolf was calling his final army. Still, Rhea looked at her king and felt a growl rise in her throat. Wait, would you trade your soul for a single kiss? Deep down, she knew the truth, because she had found something worth more than her soul. As the sky darkened, they prepared to walk into the fire. As if the forest watched, the true war finally began. The sun didn't rise. It exploded across the horizon in a wash of gold and violet. Rhea gasped as she sat up, her fingers clawing into the thick furs of the bed. She felt it, etched in fire. The blood bond was no longer just a promise. It was a physical weight, a drumbeat that matched her own heart. Soon after, she realized she wasn't alone in the room. Malakai was standing by the window, his massive frame silhouetted against the dawn. Truth be told, she had never seen anything so beautiful and so terrifying. As the bond pulsed, she felt his thoughts brushing against hers like velvet. He was worried, he was hungry, and he was deeply, dangerously in love. Because the bond was a two-way bridge, her fear of being a hollow vessel was slowly being replaced by his unshakable strength. What followed was a moment of absolute stillness. Under the weight of his stare, Rhea felt a blush creep up her neck. From there, she noticed the faint, jagged marks on her own shoulder, the place where he had claimed her. She didn't know what scared her more, the fact that she belonged to a king, or that she finally wanted to belong to someone. She felt his strength. She felt his heat. She felt his soul. Next, Malakai walked toward the bed, his movements fluid and predatory. As if pulled by a string, Rhea reached out to him. "The pack is waiting," he murmured. When her name left his lips, it sounded like a prayer. So, Rhea forced herself to stand, her legs feeling stronger than they ever had in the graveyard. Because she had tasted his alpha blood, her wolf was no longer a starving shadow, but a creature of light, which meant she was ready to face the elders again. As the silence stretched, she leaned into him, breathing in the scent of rain and cedar. She felt it, etched in fire, and she let it happen. Come morning, the great lodge felt like a drum being beaten by an angry hand. Rhea walked beside Malakai, her head held high as they entered the council chamber. What followed was a wall of cold silence from the elders. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't ignore the way they gripped their staves when she passed. In fact, one elderly female with eyes like cloudy glass spat on the floor. Despite that, Rhea didn't flinch. Deep down, she knew the truth, because she could feel the spirits of the ancestors standing in the corners of the room, watching her with silver eyes. Wait, can you hear the dead when they stop whispering and start to roar? Meanwhile, the first obstacle appeared. The shaman stepped forward, his fur gray and matted. "The bond is a trick!" he shouted. In the span of a breath, the room erupted into arguments. To make things worse, the shaman pointed a bony finger at Rhea's chest. "Because the darkness is a parasite, it will use our king to kill us all." Rather than shrinking, Rhea stepped forward. As her wolf stirred, she felt a surge of ancient power. As if summoned, 3 spectral alphas appeared behind her, their fur shimmering like moonlight. The ghosts were cold. The ghosts were hungry. The ghosts were vengeful. As the silence roared, Rhea spoke, and her voice didn't tremble. In that moment, she realized she was learning the rules of a queen. On the other hand, she saw Malakai's hand drop to his side, his claws extending. Before either could speak, Rhea placed a hand on his arm, calming the beast within him. Because she was the bridge, she was the only one who could negotiate between the living and the dead. And she let it happen. At the same time, the wind outside changed. Rhea's head snapped toward the door. The air thickened with the smell of ozone and rotting meat. Moments later, a scream tore through the valley, which meant the earth was literally cracking open. Without thinking, Rhea ran to the balcony. Instead of wolves, she saw shadows pouring out of the ground near the village well. They weren't wolves. They were skinless things made of smoke and malice. As the sky darkened, the Bane Wolf's first army began its assault. Because the Bane Wolf was a creature of the abyss, its soldiers could not be killed by normal teeth and claws. So, Rhea looked at Malakai. The moment their eyes locked, they didn't need words. As if fate demanded it, they both shifted at once. In a single heartbeat, the world shifted. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, Rhea's wolf emerged, silver and white. A moon spirit wrapped in fur. Next, she leaped from the balcony, landing in the mud with a shockwave of light. While her pulse raced, she saw the shadow creatures flinch. In the quiet that followed, she realized she was their greatest nightmare. Not only that, she felt Malakai's massive black form land beside her. Between one breath and the next, the battle began. Rhea bit a shadow wolf, and it didn't just bleed, it dissolved into mist. Because she carried the light of the ancestors in her soul, her very touch was poison to the dark. Still, there were hundreds of them. To make things worse, she felt a strange, haunting song in the wind. Wait, who is the child standing in the shadows of the forest, watching the carnage? As the echo faded, Rhea realized the shadow child was gone, leaving a trail of cold dread. Yet, as Malakai let out a roar that shook the mountains, she knew they wouldn't fall today. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, she dove back into the fray. And she let it happen. In that moment, Rhea knew she had passed the first test. By the time the last shadow had vanished, the pack elders were staring at the ground in shame, which meant the war was just starting. Maybe it was fate, but she was finally where she was meant to be. As if the forest watched, they stood together among the bones and the blood. As the silence roared, Rhea leaned into Malakai. She was the bridge, she was the guardian, and she let it happen. The forest didn't just sleep, it held its breath because the shadows were hungry. That night, the spirit forest breathed with a heavy, restless heat that made Rhea's skin prickle. She sat by the edge of the moon pool, the water reflecting her violet eyes like a mirror of crushed gems. Soon after, she felt the air change. It didn't just get warmer, it vibrated with the predatory thrum of Malakai's approach. Because his soul was now fused with hers, she could feel the exact moment his foot touched the moss a mile away. Truth be told, the quiet was more frightening than the battle they had just won. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stop the image of the shadow child from flashing in her mind. Was it a ghost? Was it a trick? Or was it a warning? Wait, do you know what it's like to see your own death wearing the face of a child? What followed was a shadow stretching over the water, long and dark. Malakai stepped into the clearing, his chest bare and marked by the battle, but his golden eyes were only for her. As the bond pulsed, a jolt of liquid fire raced down Rhea's spine, making her wolf pace within her mind. As if pulled by a string, she stood up, the silk of her tunic clinging to her damp skin. Next, he was there, his heat hitting her like a physical wave that made the cold mist evaporate. Under the weight of his stare, Rhea felt her walls crumbling. Because she had been a prisoner for so long, his tenderness felt more dangerous than a blade. Yet, she leaned into him. In the span of a breath, the space between them burned with a hunger that made her head spin, and she let it happen. But then, the reflection in the water shifted and turned ugly. Rhea looked down, her breath hitching in her throat as the moon pool turned from silver to an oily, bubbling black. What followed was a vision that made her soul scream in the dark. She saw Kalen, but he wasn't a man or a wolf anymore. Instead, he was a mountain of rotting fur and smoke, his jaw unhinged to swallow the sun. What's worse, the shadow child stood at his side, holding a leash made of Rhea's own silver hair. In that moment, Rhea realized the game had changed. The Bane Wolf didn't just want the pack. He wanted to turn Rhea into a gate that would stay open forever. Because the hybrid blood in her veins was the only key to the abyss, she was the prize Kalen would destroy the world to win. Without warning, the vision shattered into 1,000 pieces of black glass. Rhea fell back, her heart hammering, thump, thump, thump. Moments later, Malakai's strong arms were around her, grounding her. Deep down, she knew the truth. The shadow child wasn't a separate spirit. It was the piece of Rhea's innocence that the rival pack had stolen years ago. So, she looked at Malakai, her voice shaking like a leaf in a storm. As the truth unraveled, she realized Kaylin was planning to use her own past trauma to break her mind. Still, Malakai held her tighter, his growl vibrating through her bones. She was the blood. She was the bone. She was the bridge. But if she broke, the bridge would become a tomb, which meant the stakes were no longer just about their love. They were about the survival of every living soul. And she let it happen. As the silence stretched, a cold, sharp argument began to echo off the stone walls of the great lodge. Malakai wanted to hide her in the deepest cavern, protected by 100 warriors. Rather than feeling safe, Rhea felt the old chains of the graveyard tightening around her wrists. Because she had finally found her voice, she refused to be a bird in a cage again. So, she stepped back, her eyes flashing with a violet gold fire that made the torches flicker. In a single heartbeat, the world shifted. As her instincts surged, she didn't just talk. She showed him who she was. As if summoned, the spirits of the 3 ancient alphas rose from the floor, their spectral fangs bared and their eyes locked on Malakai. "I am not a victim anymore, Malakai!" Rhea shouted. Her chest ached as she saw the flash of hurt in his golden eyes. Despite that, she stood her ground. "I am the queen of the dead, and I will fight by your side, or I will fight alone." As the silence roared, Malakai shifted into his massive black wolf form, a low, warning rumble coming from his throat. He was the king. He was the sun. He was the law. Yet, Rhea didn't flinch. Between one breath and the next, she shifted too, her silver-white fur shimmering with a light that didn't belong to this world. The tension broke when Malakai lowered his head, a gesture of submission he had never shown to anyone. Because he recognized her as his true equal, the bond snapped into a new, unbreakable shape. As the sky darkened, a heavy blood-red moon began to rise over the trees. To make things worse, the scent of sulfur and decay filled the air. The Bane Wolf's army was moving. Rhea looked at her mate, and she didn't see fear. She saw a man ready to burn for her. Deep down, she knew the truth. Tonight, she would either close the gate or become it. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, she looked at Malakai one last time, which meant there were no more secrets between them, and she let it happen. Beneath the moonlight, the forest floor didn't just feel like dirt. It felt like a drum vibrating with the heartbeat of 1,000 hungry ghosts. Rhea led the vanguard, her silver-white fur glowing with an eerie, phosphorescent light that cut through the thick, unnatural fog. With every step he took beside her, Malakai's massive black form was a shadow that refused to be swallowed by the dark. What followed was a silence so heavy, it made her ears ache. No matter how hard she tried, Rhea couldn't stop her mind from drifting back to the warmth of the lodge, yet she knew there was no turning back now. Deep down, she knew the truth. The girl who feared the dead was gone, and in her place stood a weapon forged from starlight and teeth. Because her shamanic blood was singing a war song, the very trees seemed to lean away from her path. Soon after, the mist began to taste like iron and old pennies. Rhea shifted back to her human form, her breath coming in white plumes that were instantly swallowed by the gray dampness. Without thinking, she reached for Malakai's hand, her fingers searching for the rough warmth of his skin. The space between them burned even as the temperature dropped. Because they were fated mates, his energy was the only thing keeping her from fading into the ghost mist. Under the weight of his stare, She felt her resolve harden like stone. "Rhea," he whispered, his voice a low vibration that rumbled in his chest. "If we do this, if we step into the center of the graveyard, there is no guarantee the ancestors will let us out." When her name left his lips, she felt a jolt of fire go down her spine. Still, she didn't pull away. Rather, she gripped his hand tighter, her thumb tracing the jagged scar of their blood bond. Next, a blood-curdling howl ripped through the air, coming from the center of the graveyard. The tension broke as the first wave of shadow wolves emerged from the fog. He was her light. He was her anchor. He was her mate. She looked at him with a fierce determination. "Then we burn them all together, Malakai. I'm not going back to the dark alone." Without warning, the gray world exploded into a flurry of black fur and snapping jaws. Rhea shifted in midair, a violent, beautiful crack of bone and fur, her silver form a blur of moonlight as she tore through a shadow wolf that smelled of rotting meat. The air was a storm of fur. The air was a storm of blood. The air was a storm of light. After that, she felt the psychic backlash of the creature's death, a cold, oily sensation that tried to numb her heart. Still, she pushed through. Instead of fighting with just muscle, she called upon the spirits of the first alphas. As if summoned, 3 massive, translucent wolves materialized at her side. Because she was finally owning her hybrid nature, the spirits didn't just serve her, they worshipped her. Meanwhile, Malakai was a whirlwind of black destruction at the center of the clearing. With every heartbeat, he took down another grave wolf, his roars shaking the very foundations of the earth. Even so, Rhea saw him stumble. To make things worse, the shadow child appeared at the edge of the clearing, its eyes 2 pits of bottomless black. As the sky darkened, the child pointed a small, pale finger at Malakai. Before either could speak, a bolt of black lightning struck the ground at Malakai's feet, throwing him backward into a jagged rock. In that moment, Rhea's world tilted. She didn't know what scared her more, the shadow child's empty gaze or the raw, primitive rage that was currently drowning her human mind. Because she loved him more than her own soul, she didn't think twice about the cost. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, she stood over Malakai, her hackles raised. As if fate demanded it, she locked eyes with the child. As the truth unraveled, Rhea didn't see a monster. Instead, she saw her own 10-year-old self crying in the dark of the graveyard. She forgave the girl. She forgave the fear. She forgave herself. Because her pain was the most powerful thing she owned, the Bane Wolf had fed on it until it became a god. As the echo faded, the shadow child flickered and turned into silver dust, a shimmering mist that vanished into the trees. Rhea collapsed to her knees beside Malakai, her human hands trembling as she touched the deep gashes on his chest. As the bond pulsed, she felt his pain as if it were her own, a sharp, throbbing heat. Despite that, he reached out and grabbed her wrist. In the quiet that followed, his golden eyes searched hers. "You did it," he wheezed, blood staining his teeth, which meant the inner ghost was finally gone. But then, a rumble shook the trees, sending birds screaming into the night sky. To make things worse, the scent of sulfur became unbearable. So, they walked toward the center of the graveyard, toward the bone gate that was cracking open. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, Rhea felt her wolf and her spirit merge into one. And she let it happen. The world didn't just break, it screamed as the earth opened up like a hungry mouth under Rhea's paws. What followed was a sight that made her heart stop in her chest. Kalen was no longer a wolf. Rather, he was a tower of black smoke and jagged bone, his eyes glowing with a sick green fire. He was pulling the very souls out of the ground because the bone gate was finally open. Rhea tried to call her spectral alphas to her side. Instead, her power flickered like a dying candle in a storm. "Malakai!" she cried, her voice lost in the roaring wind. Before she could move, Kalen lashed out with a whip of shadow. In that moment, the ground beneath her feet vanished. What's worse, Malakai lunged to save her, but 3 black spears of spirit magic slammed into his chest. They pinned him to a massive dead oak tree. As the silence stretched, Rhea fell. She tumbled down a steep ravine of old, crumbling bones. Deep down, she knew the truth. The plan had failed because she had led her king into a trap. Truth be told, the Banewolf had been waiting for this moment for 1,000 years. Because she had trusted her own shaky heart, the whole pack was going to pay the price in blood. What followed was the sound of Malakai's agony echoing through the bond. It was a raw, tearing sound. It was a sound of a dying god. It was a sound that broke Rhea's soul. Soon after, she hit the bottom of the pit. Darkness swallowed her whole. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't find the light. To make things worse, the spirits in the pit weren't silent. They began to crawl over her skin like spiders made of frost. As the silence roared, Rhea curled into a ball. She was cold, she was alone, she was empty, and she let it happen. In the quiet that followed, Rhea listened to the ghosts laugh at her in the dark. They whispered that she was a freak. They told her she was a hollow vessel that had finally cracked. What followed was a wave of memories she had tried to bury since childhood. She saw her father's cold eyes and the chains that used to bind her. Because she was a hybrid, the spirits knew exactly where she was weak. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were right. She was just a girl who played with ghosts and got a king killed. Wait, have you ever felt the breath of 1,000 dead things on your neck? Even so, the physical pain in her ribs was nothing compared to the void in her chest where Malakai's heartbeat used to be. "Malakai," she whispered. But the bond was silent, which meant he was either unconscious or slipping into the dark. Moments later, a familiar, hateful voice drifted down into the pit. It was Kalen, standing at the top of the ledge. Under the weight of his stare, Rhea felt like a bug under a boot. "Look at you," Kalen sneered, his voice vibrating with the power of the Banewolf. "The great hybrid queen rotting in a hole. Because you are a mistake, your king is going to die for nothing. I will use his blood to seal the gate forever. Not only that, I will make you watch as I turn his pack into my slaves." As the sky darkened, Rhea felt her last bit of hope vanish. Still, she tried to claw her way up the wall of bones. Instead, the skeletons shifted and dragged her back down. To make things worse, the air began to smell like Malakai's blood. She didn't know what scared her more, the death of her world or the fact that she wanted to give up. Deep down, she knew the truth. She was just a graveyard, and she let it happen. What followed was the dark night of the soul, as the moon turned a bruised, sickly purple above the pit. Rhea lay in the bones, her eyes wide and sightless. As the silence roared, she realized that her internal flaw had won. She had believed she was nothing without the dead, and now the dead had abandoned her. But then, a single, tiny spark of warmth flickered in her gut. It wasn't the magic of the ancestors. Rather, It was the memory of Malakai's kiss. Because his love was the only thing that was truly hers, it was the only thing the Banewolf couldn't take. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, Rhea realized she had been looking for power in the wrong place. She didn't need the spirits to be strong. She needed to be Rhea. "I am not a vessel," she hissed, her voice growing stronger with every heartbeat. In a single heartbeat, the world shifted. She pushed the ghosts away with a surge of pure, human will. As her instincts surged, she stood up in the pile of bones, which meant the game wasn't over. Yet, she could still hear Kaylin preparing the sacrifice above her. So, she looked up at the tiny circle of purple sky. She felt it, etched in fire. She had to get to him. No matter how hard she tried to ignore the pain in her body, she began to climb. This time, the bones didn't pull her back. Instead, they seemed to form a ladder for her. By the time she reached the top, her hands were raw and bleeding. What followed was the sight of Kaylin holding a jagged bone blade over Malakai's throat. As the air thickened, the Banewolf began to chant the final spell. In the span of a breath, Rhea realized she was too far away to stop the blade with her body. The tension broke as Kaylin looked at her and laughed. As her wolf stirred, she realized the goal seemed impossible. Time stood still. She didn't know what scared her more, the blade or the look of peace on Malakai's face as he waited for the end. Between one breath and the next, the blade began to fall. As the truth unraveled, Rhea let out a scream that shook the world, and she let it happen. In that moment, the world didn't just stop. It bowed to the sound of a queen. Rhea's scream wasn't the plea of a victim. Rather, it was a roar of power that shattered the bone blade into 1,000 tiny pieces before it could touch Malakai's skin. What followed was a silence so deep that Rhea could hear the blood rushing through her own veins. Because her heart was no longer a hollow graveyard, the spirits of the dead found a home in her light. Soon after, she stepped out from the bone pit, her silver fur glowing with a violet fire that made the ghosts of the valley kneel. Truth be told, she didn't know she had this much heat in her blood. It was a roar of mercy. It was a roar of war. It was a roar of a queen. By the time Rhea reached Malakai's side, the spirits of the graveyard were no longer whispering. They were chanting a song of war in the back of her mind. Next, she looked at the black spears of magic pinning her king to the dead tree. Her heart skipped because she could feel the cold iron of those spears in her own chest through their bond. Because of that, she reached out and grabbed the shafts of shadow with her bare hands. Without thinking, she pulled with everything she had. In a single heartbeat, the world shifted as the spears dissolved into silver dust and vanished. As the bond pulsed, she felt Malakai's life force rush back into his body. He felt her love. He felt her strength. He felt her heat. And she let it happen. Between one breath and the next, the race to the climax began. Rhea and Malakai didn't say a word to each other. Instead, they turned their eyes toward Kaylin and the massive shadow beast rising behind him. So, they lunged across the clearing at the same time, two blurs of black and silver fur. While her pulse raced, Rhea realized the Shadow Child was gone, but the Banewolf was still fighting for control of the world. Because they were fated mates, their two hearts beat with a single, thunderous rhythm that the dark could not break. As a result, the Shadow Army began to crumble into mist as they passed. The air thickened as they reached the center of the Bone Gate, which meant there was no turning back for either of them. What followed was an explosion of green fire as Kaelin tried to seal the gate with them inside. Rhea didn't flinch. In fact, she felt the power of the ancestors rising up through her paws to meet the challenge. More importantly, she felt Malakai's shoulder press against hers, his scent of cedar and rain giving her courage. Because her shamanic blood was the only key to the abyss, she held the door open with her mind while Malakai fought the monster. Moments later, the Banewolf let out a gurgling scream of rage. She didn't know what scared her more, the green fire or the absolute silence coming from the other side. Still, she knew they were ready to finish this. As the silence roared, they prepared for the final strike. As the sky darkened, Rhea and Malakai stood at the very edge of the rift. What's worse, Kaelin was trying to drag them down into the dark with him. As her instincts surged, Rhea called upon every spirit she had ever helped. As if summoned, the ghosts of the first alphas rose from the ground and wrapped their spectral claws around Kaelin. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, Rhea looked at her mate and saw her own reflection in his golden eyes. As a result, the fear vanished. Deep down, she knew the truth. They weren't just individuals anymore. They were a pack. Because their love was the strongest magic in the forest, the Bane Wolf's chains snapped like dry twigs. As if fate demanded it, they leaped into the heart of the fire together to save their home. And she let it happen. The green fire didn't just burn. It screamed with the voices of 1,000 angry souls. Rhea felt the heat of the abyss trying to melt her fur, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned closer to Malakai's massive black flank. In a single heartbeat, the world shifted. They weren't in the graveyard anymore. Rather, he was there, the monster Kaelin had become, looming over them like a mountain of rotting smoke. Because their souls were now a single flame, the darkness couldn't touch them. Still, the Banewolf lunged with a roar that felt like the earth breaking apart. Deep down, she knew the truth. This wasn't a fight of teeth and claws. It was a battle of wills. So, Rhea threw her head back and let out a howl that carried the weight of every spirit she had ever carried. As her instincts surged, she didn't bite flesh. Rather, she sank her ghostly fangs into the black heart of the shadow. Actually, the beast didn't bleed. It dissolved into ash. In the quiet that followed, the green fire turned to gold. As the echo faded, the golden light returned. Rhea felt her body hitting the soft clover of the graveyard. Soon after, she realized she was lying in Malakai's arms. What followed was a sense of peace so deep it made her want to weep. Next, she saw the spirits of the dead. They weren't scary ghosts anymore. Instead, they were glowing figures of light. Because Rhea had closed the gate, the souls were finally free. More importantly, she saw Malakai's father. He wasn't snarling. In fact, he looked proud. Between them, something cracked. It was the last of Malakai's guilt. As the bond pulsed, Rhea felt his joy rushing through her like a warm river. It was a blessing. It was a goodbye. It was a beginning, which meant the haunting was over. Come morning, the great lodge looked like a palace made of sunbeams. Rhea stood on the balcony in a gown of silver silk that shimmered like her wolf's fur. What followed was the crowning of the first hybrid queen. More importantly, Malakai stood by her side, his crown of silver briar matching her own. As the sky darkened with the coming evening, the entire valley filled with the sound of 1,000 wolves howling in harmony. Because she had saved the world finally saw her. Wait, can you feel the shift when a graveyard turns into a garden? Truth be told, she had never felt so whole. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, she turned to her king. And she let it happen. 1 year later, the forest was full of life. Rhea sat in the grass and watched a small girl with silver hair and golden eyes run through the trees. What followed was a massive black wolf emerging from the brush to nudge the child gently. Actually, Rhea's heart felt like it would burst because her daughter would never know a cage. No more chains, no more graves, no more hiding. Because their love was etched in fire, they were safe. Moments later, Malakai shifted and sat beside her, pulling her into his heat. As the silence roared, Rhea looked at the horizon and smiled. Deep down, she knew the truth. She was the blood. She was the bone. She was the bridge. So, the Queen of the Dead finally learned how to live.